Welcome everyone to our Great Mystery Web Salon with Anne Baring on Seeing Through the Veil, the survival of the soul and life beyond death. It's my pleasure to introduce all of you to Anne, who may not already be familiar with her. Anne Baring is a leading expert in the development of consciousness as reflected in dream, vision, myth, and art. She studied history at Oxford, is a Jungian analyst, now retired, and author and co-author of 7 books, including The Myth of the Goddess, Evolution of an Image, The Birds Who Flew Beyond Time, The Mystic Vision, The Divine Feminine, Soul Power, An Agenda for a Conscious Humanity, and her new book, which was just released this month, is The Dream of the Cosmos. So thank you, Anne, so much for being with us.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
So tell us, how did you begin your quest?
My quest began when I was 11 and I had an out-of-the-body experience, which was utterly unknown to me and utterly terrifying at the time. And that was where it started. I wondered what did exist beyond this world. Why was I sent through a channel like a sort of cannonball and precipitated out the other end into the great black darkness where a voice said 2 words to me, and that's all. And so when I returned to my body, I was absolutely terrified, but so glad to be back in this world. But that began my search, my quest. And then I also had channeled messages from my mother from about the age of 12. This was in 1943, way back during the war. And they really were something that influenced my whole life and have directed my quest. And I talk about it in my book. I won't go into it now. But this was a very powerful influence, and it's still with me now, something that started at the age of 12.
You talk about in your work that you feel that the cosmos is conscious. What to you indicates that? What are the indicators?
Well, I think it goes back to my research into the Great Mother, and I think that's the origin of the idea that the soul has a cosmos, and it has a maternal aspect as well as the male aspect that we know of. So it's like a great cosmic web of life, and I think that we are embedded in that web. So the soul is not only something that's in us, but it's something that we are in, something absolutely vast, which we're only just becoming aware of. So this is the ground of our consciousness, in my view.
And what image do you think we have of death?
Well, I think we have a very gloomy one of death, and I think that it's very sad and tragic, really, that for centuries or millennia we haven't really got beyond the image that we've got now, although shamanic cultures certainly knew a great deal more about death than we do now. But I think it's extraordinary that after all these millennia on this planet and the vast amount of knowledge that's available to us, we still know virtually nothing about the most mysterious and challenging experiences of our lives, that is our birth and our death. So where do we come from when we're born, and where do we go to when we die? Generally, the culture knows nothing about this, but there is a great deal of information which I'll come to as we go through this interview.
You know, I recently heard a wonderful description that life was like a stream, and that the opposite of death isn't life, but birth, and that they're like doorways that we pass through along this, continual stream of life.
I'm sure this is true, and I love this picture that's on the screen now, because it shows this man looking out beyond this world to something that is beyond. So we've always had this longing to know more. It's the thing that drives science and drives all of us to understand more. So I think we have to come out of Plato's cave, where we've been for far too long, and stop seeing the shadows, but really look at the reality in which we're embedded.
Yes.
So I think our lives would change if we knew that the journey beyond life leads us into greater life, not into death, but into greater life. It's not the end, it's an absolute new beginning. And possibly we've experienced this beginning many, many times as we've gone in and out of life on this planet.
do you feel that if we really understood that death is not how we've been perceiving it, that it's not an end to our existence, our being as conscious beings, but just passing into, let's say, a more subtle form or something, that this would influence war, for instance?
Yes, I do, because I'm sure that a great deal of the aggression in the world comes from fear and also from self-hatred, that we don't know more. And the aggression is then projected out into conflicts in the world, and we fight people out there, so to speak, believing that when we kill them, we get rid of them, which is just ridiculous. We don't get rid of them. They move on into another world, and we, when we die, move on to the same world. So it's really important to get this sorted out here before we go on with these dreadful conflicts in which we believe we're really getting rid of people and you know, helping our side to win. I mean, it's too ludicrous, the whole thing about that, about war.
What do you think about, you know, cultures like with some of these suicide bombers that feel that if they do this mission and kill these people, that they go to heaven?
Well, I think they may go to another state. I don't know that it will be heaven, but I think that that is a concept, just like we had a concept in Christianity. We go to either heaven or hell or purgatory. It's a belief, but it's not borne out by any experience that's coming from the other side, which I'll come to later on.
Because they also then, it seems that they must, you know, like that they believe, let's say, in reincarnation for themselves, but not for those that they might kill.
Well, that's right, yes. There's always been that prejudice as well. So I think we've all got a great deal to learn. Everybody, really, on Earth. We have to go beyond what our religions have taught us and really find out for ourselves.
Yes. What do you feel the soul world is like?
Well, I think I'd like to come to that later on, but I want to talk a little bit, as we have this picture here of Brian Cox, if I could talk a little bit about science and the fact that only 4% of the universe is visible to us. So what does the other 96% conceal? And what is dark matter, which scientists are absolutely fascinated by? What is this Higgs boson field that they're talking about? And again, they've been so excited to find it through the CERN thing in Geneva. But the problem is that science has told us that consciousness originates with the physical brain, and that the death of the brain is therefore the end of consciousness. And they presented this as an absolute truth, whereas in fact it's only a belief based on the science that they have. But there's vast amount of knowledge coming from other cultures that they're not aware of, ancient cultures and very important cultures. So until very recently, they haven't really taken seriously the huge amount of material that's been gathered in the last 100 years or so by several institutions which have been devoted to recording non-ordinary experiences, NDEs and OBEs, and all this has not been considered rational and therefore not subject to the view of science. Mm-hmm. And also there have been communications from the so-called dead to the living. There are many books written about this. And they haven't really accepted the experience of visionaries and mystics of all cultures, which testify to the existence of these other dimensions of reality. So it's high time, I think, that we opened our minds to the existence of these dimensions and the possibility of a direct relationship with them. And apparently they want a direct relationship with us. And the more we can work together, the more the veil will thin and ultimately disappear, I hope. So I wanted to just give you two quotes. One is by Stephen Hawking, the great scientist in England. And his view of death is what I've been talking about, that brains are like computers, he says. There is no heaven or afterlife for broken down computers. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. So that's a very grim image of death. Death is the end. And I think because of this belief, which is so current in our society, the greatest sorrow and the greatest fear we may experience in our lives is the loss of a beloved parent or partner or child, believing that he or she may be lost to us forever, and that reunion with them is uncertain. And particularly for a child who has lost a parent and is taught that there's nothing beyond this life, to carry that grief for the rest of his or her life. And here's another quotation, just to finish this, these two quotes, from the great Indian sage Rabindranath Tagore, who gives us a totally different image. And he says, death is not extinguishing the light, but putting out the lamp because the dawn has come. That's so beautiful and so simply put and so encouraging and hopeful that I really love that quote.
Yes, it is beautiful. You know, on the science, I know there is a doctor, I believe he was a brain surgeon, or maybe, anyway, a heart surgeon. Eben Alexander is his name, and he had a recent, or not too long ago, a near-death experience, and it was so profound for him. And he was not a believer before in life after death. That I think he is really working with some other doctors and scientists to, based on his own experience, to really kind of bring this to light in the scientific community.
Well, that would be wonderful. I have read his book and I was very moved by it and very interested. And I think somebody like that can do a great deal of good. And I'll come to somebody else later on. But I just wanted to talk about this wonderful picture, which was painted in the 15th century by Hieronymus Bosch. And he must have had either a near-death experience himself or known some friend who had, because it's so absolutely like the descriptions that were given. And there's an angel on the right accompanying the soul and taking the soul into the tunnel. And then there's a figure at the other end in the light waiting to receive that transitioning soul. It's just so beautiful and so eloquent.
Oh.
So I think we need to change urgently. We need to change our view of death. And I think it would change the way we live our lives. And a huge amount of fear and aggression and grief would be lifted from our shoulders. I think if we knew, sorry, go ahead, Robin.
Well, I was just going to ask you, what do you think it would be like if we really knew that we were immortal?
Well, I think that we would have a greater trust in life. We would live life differently without so much fear. We would look forward to death, really, instead of fearing it and putting it off and being terrified of it. It would just change our view of life as well as death. And I think if we knew that we would be reunited with our family and our loved ones, and that we could go on with our life in a much richer way, even freer way, and that we could explore and grow and develop our creative gifts even more than we can here, I think that it would take away all this fear and horror, really, of death. Because it is horror. And when you've gone through the loss of someone, you don't know whether they're ever going to be seen by you again. It is horror. So suppose we knew beyond any possibility of doubt that we are immortal, and that the finality of death is the greatest of our illusions. And suppose we knew that death is simply a change of worlds, and that when we die we enter another dimension of reality, another state of being, but without losing the self-awareness or the consciousness that we have in this world or this dimension. There's a beautiful quote from the Bhagavad Gita which tells us that our consciousness is inseparable from the great body of radiance and has no birth nor death and is the immutable light. That's a thought to hang on to, I think.
Yes.
So I think there's an incredible vista of life that is waiting to be discovered. We just have to open the door to it. Open the door of our culture, which has been so closed. And the more we explore it, the more prepared we will be for our own death. And the more we'll understand the meaning and value of our lives here on this planet. I'm quite sure of that.
You know, you mentioned about being reunited with our loved ones here. Do you feel that on the other side that we have soul families and that perhaps the parents we come to be with and the siblings or lovers are part of our soul family? Or that they might just be here for this experience?
Yes, I do. I feel they're definitely soul families. And even here on this planet, I feel that we're finding through the internet our soul families. And possibly we're preparing for a great reunion over the other side when we all move on. Because there's a good many of us now, between our 40s and our 80s, working to connect on all these ideas. And I think we've been incarnated specifically to do this work together. And it's a great joy to meet everybody on the internet who's involved in this. And you're one of the people for me. It's a great joy to meet you.
Thank you, and you for me too. It's very exciting what might be possible to open up, our little window. You had mentioned, shamanic cultures. Can you talk a bit about some of their beliefs or?
Yes, because I think that from what I've been able to understand and from what we've been able to learn in the last 50 years, shamanic cultures have always had the awareness that there are many dimensions of reality and that they can travel to them. They can travel to the animal dimension and connect with the animals there, and they can connect with other shamanic people or entities. And there's a great body of law there, whether you look at the Aborigines in Australia or the Colombian Indians, I can't remember their names, can you remember them? Who live in the Colombian mountains.
The elder brothers, the Kogi.
Yes, the Kogis. And then there's the Amazonian Indians and the New Zealand, African, and also Outer Mongolia. They're extraordinary people there who know a great deal. And all of these have had experiences for centuries, for millennia, of moving into other dimensions and being taught from them and being directed to, say, trees or plants in nature that would help them to heal diseases and things. So there's been a great two-way highway, really, in these cultures. And also the great cultures we know, like the Egyptian, the Persian, the Indian, the Chinese, the ancient civilizations, they also have had a great body of knowledge to do with all of this in multiple dimensions of reality.
I lived in Hawaii for many years, and the Hawaiians have a belief, they call it the Amakua. So like, let's say the shark could be someone's Amakua, which would be their ancestors, which gives them a great respect for all living beings, all sentient beings.
Yeah, well, I think that is very much part of their law, and also there are people still who can communicate with the whales, both in, I read off the coast of Mexico and in New Zealand, and also that when they want to kill an animal like the shark for eating, they ask permission of the shark. They go out and ask for permission. And this was very much part of the law, even of the ancient civilization in Europe, the people who lived in the cave in the Dordogne, that very early culture. They had this close connection with animals, there's no doubt about it. Also, I think I should say something about the moon, because I think shamanic cultures were very closely connected with the observation of the moon, even down to megalithic times in our own Western civilization. And they knew that there is no death because the moon was continually reborn from the dark phase. And I think it's possible that reincarnation came from that observation of the moon and the idea that we're reborn in this dimension many, many times and that we don't die. So there's that at the base of really the forgotten part of what our culture has developed on. I think reincarnation was once part of Christian doctrine, which many people don't realize. Until in 553, it was removed on the orders of the Emperor Justinian. And he did that because he didn't like one of the early Christian fathers called Origen. And he thought, well, I'm not going to have this anymore, possibly influenced by his wife. And they got rid of it. Otherwise, reincarnation would still possibly be part of Christian doctrine. I think that past life regression is another thing.
Yes. I was so surprised when I learned about that reincarnation was part of the Christian cosmology, because it's something you never really hear about.
Absolutely. I think that I just want to mention here before we move on to this beautiful picture by Blake, that in the Christian revelation, Jesus said that in his Father's house there were many mansions. I think that's something that we might bear in mind. And I've often wondered whether Jesus' appearance in his soul body to Mary Magdalene after his crucifixion and to some of his closest disciples on the road to Emmaus, didn't convey the message to us that we also have a soul body, and that the death of the physical body is not the end, that beyond death there is life. I mean, there is, if you like, there's a template for us to help us to trust in our own survival.
Yes, yes, very, very beautifully put.
I've never thought of that really until preparing for this talk. So in this beautiful painting here of Jacob's dream, we can see the souls moving up and down this ladder between dimensions, spiraling on to infinity or to a space we can't see. And as I said, for thousands of years, shamanic cultures have known about this ladder. They actually called it a ladder, and they had a special place, often in the landscape, which connected them to those other dimensions. It could be a special stone, or a special crevice in the rock, or something that gave them the feeling that this was the place to come to communicate with another dimension and to talk to the ancestors. And
I know when I've done shamanic journeying, they talk, they use the ladder reference, for going to the upper world or the lower world.
Yeah, well, it makes such sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The idea of the ladder and moving up the rungs of the ladder and down again too, into this world. And it's hard to realize that this world is really one of the lowest of all the worlds. Not that it isn't absolutely marvelous, but it's one of the densest. So I think we have ancient spiritual traditions have told us, that is, traditions like the Egyptian or the Persian or the Hindu or the Buddhist, and also the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah. They've taught that the universe has multiple levels and dimensions and subtle worlds, and that these can be accessed through processes of contemplation and meditation, or through shamanic methods that we've just mentioned. So the greatest spiritual teachers have also testified to the existence of this reality, and have experienced the higher dimensions of it. And I personally think that some of these great teachers, like the Buddha or Christ, have actually come as emissaries from these higher worlds, these higher dimensions, to our planet to teach us and to raise our consciousness. And I think it's only by cleansing the doors of perception, as Blake advised us, that we can become aware of the presence of these transcendent worlds. I feel even as we speak, they're all around us. They're probably listening into this conversation in their own internet system.
That's a comforting thought.
I often feel that they are present, and they certainly helped writing my book. If I hadn't had their help, I couldn't have done it, definitely.
These wonderful guides. So that would be like, would that be like the concept of the Bodhisattva? They keep coming back to help awaken the rest of humanity?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And every culture has had these great teachers coming back, but we haven't listened to them. We haven't really paid attention to what they're saying. I think they're saying that all life is sacred, and that every single aspect of life is sacred, and that we can't treat life and the planet as we are. This one is coming back now, I'm sure it's what they say.
And that we're connected to everything and everyone.
They were connected to everything. I've got a lovely image later on for that. But now maybe I wanted to, we need a map, and here's a map which I made when I was writing my chapter in my book, of basically 3 orders of reality, although within each one there are multiple dimensions, so they're not just 3 circles indicating 3 dimensions, but you have to imagine many, many more, thousands of dimensions within the soul circle and within the spirit circle. This is something that is difficult to take on board because it's such a huge concept. It's almost like looking at the cosmos and all those billions of galaxies and realizing that within those galaxies there may be hidden dimensions. And looking at the sheer number of them is absolutely mind-boggling. So in these 3 circles, I've got, first of all, the material dimension, which is the plane of Earth. which the Buddhists have called samsara. And then the second one is what I call the dimension of cosmic soul, which is so vast that we can't really imagine the dimensions of it. And it contains so much, which again is beyond our power to grasp, I think. But that the soul is the intermediary one between the physical realm and the level of spirit. It's probably where billions and billions of souls actually live or are part of a greater life, maybe in different groups, in different soul groups, belonging to different nations or on Earth, so to speak, but they move on into different dimensions which are specific to the group that they knew on Earth. I don't know, because this is something that I'm just thinking about. I can't say I know definitely. But then the highest level, or the densest, or the deepest level rather, because it's not only higher, but you have to imagine it in depth as well, is the realm of spirit, the spirit world, which is far beyond our capacity to understand or experience, although we are permeated by it all the time, because that realm of spirit, which is the ground of being, comes down through all the dimensions of reality and into this physical dimension as well. So I don't think they're two things, spirit and matter, but an unimaginably vast vibrational field that holds an infinity of worlds or dimensions which exist at different degrees or variations of vibration. There are over 100 billion galaxies in our universe, and many of these may hold the possibility of life. We have no idea yet. Scientists are looking for life. But other traditions have known that there is life in the universe, that it has a hidden soul life as well as a physical manifest life that we see in the wonderful starry skies that we look up at every night. And the closer the zones or the spheres beyond us are to the source, the more radiant they are, and the finer is their vibrational frequency. And the beauty of these higher spheres is indescribable, apparently. People have tried to describe it in messages from the other side, but they say it is indescribable. The light in the higher worlds does not come from the sun, but from an ineffable source of light, from the ground of being in this spirit level, so to speak. Do you think I'm making this clear for people?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's I think it's something to wrap our mind around, how these levels work and what the interconnection is, and that we know we have this dense physical body, and we can imagine our etheric body's been measured with Kirlian photography, in our auric field.
Yeah.
So we know we've got that body, and then just getting subtler and subtler.
Getting subtler and subtler. And we have to use our imagination, because that's really all we've got. We haven't got it pinned down in scientific knowledge and fact. This has to be part of our imagination that is developing.
Yes, and I think the stories that we're getting from people that have had these near-death experiences are helping to shape that.
Absolutely. It's interesting that they're coming so strongly now from people like Dr. Alexander, also from a woman called Anita Morjani, whom I invited to speak at a conference I organized a little over a year ago. She came from Hong Kong, and absolutely wonderful experience where she was cured of cancer when she was literally at death's door. So there are these experiences that are coming through to us, and there was all the work by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which 20 or 30 years ago, she really opened the door, just like Rachel Carson opened the door to the ecological problem. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was an extraordinary pioneer, and because she was a psychiatrist, she had the power to speak with authority, and she put it all in her books. I think On Death and Dying is one of them. She's an extraordinary woman. So what she communicated and what these near-death experiences are communicating is that we are immortal beings, and that we retain the essence of our individuality after our death. And that there are countless numbers of these unseen worlds, planes or dimensions, maybe even other universes, that are inhabited by countless billions of souls. Some souls apparently reincarnate into this material world, but others don't. Others move on to dimensions we know nothing about. But some can move also between these three dimensions quite easily. Once they've left their physical body, they move between many dimensions in the soul world, and eventually they move into the dimensions in the spirit world. And they say, the people who are writing from the other side, they say there's no specific heaven or hell to which people can be consigned indefinitely. But there are states of being which can be compared to these. People can get stuck, for instance, if they don't believe that there's any life after death, they can get stuck in that belief until somebody comes and says, look, you're actually living in a world that's beyond the physical world, and you need to move on towards the light. So they can be helped. There's always the possibility of help being given by people who have moved further towards the light, so to speak, and who come and rescue these souls who are stuck in what's called the Shadowlands. So another important thing is that underlying all this plethora of worlds or dimensions is the light and the love of the divine ground, which emanates from the highest plane of spirit and spreads out or sustains really all other worlds and all levels of reality, including our own, so that as you and I are talking, we're actually in this light, and our bodies are composed of this light, and our speech and our thought and our ideas really come from this divine ground which is permeating us all the time. So the cosmic ground of being has been described as an immeasurable ocean of light and love. We can't see this light unless we have this near-death experience when we do see it. But we and everything on this planet are apparently the embodiment and the creation of that light and love. And it wants to be known as such. It wants to be known that it is the ground, that it's there within us, and that we're beginning to communicate with it. And what I've learned from this is that everything in this world is sacred. It's a sacred creation. It's not something for us to use and abuse, but to treat with the greatest reverence. And as Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, I think Tim Freak mentioned this last week, that he said the kingdom of heaven is spread upon the earth and men do not see it. We can't see this light and we can't see the true wonder of what we are in the midst of, but it's there. So with this beautiful picture, which I took from the internet from some wonderful designer who made it, who I acknowledge, I wanted to use this as an image of the net of Indra, which is very much part of the Hindu and Buddhist cosmological traditions. It's such a wonderful concept because the silken strands of this great net extend to the far reaches of the universe. And at every intersection of the net is a luminous pearl. And the surface of every pearl reflects every other, with the process continuing and amplifying to infinity. And the pearls themselves represent the souls of animate beings, our own souls. And within each pearl there's a boundless universe of images and experiences. And through the unifying nature of this vast net, all life is one. So at the deepest level, we're all connected with each other. And it's such a wonderful image, this net of Indra. And I've written about it in my book on the soul. Because that is the soul, really. That is the great web of life. And all of us are connected through it. And I think the internet is making us conscious of our connections with each other and what can be done with them. I mean, we're only at the beginning. It's only how many years, 5 years, 10 years, since we've had this extraordinary communication ability. So if we wonder where evil comes from, I think it comes from our ignorance of who we are and of this great sort of being in whose life we live, and why we're here on this planet, and from all the beliefs that have inculcated fear or pain or self-hatred and the aggression that comes from these. I don't think people are naturally evil or aggressive. I think that this comes through programming, either through parental programming or through educational program, or religious or scientific programming, if it comes to that. So we really have to question all our beliefs and ask, are these enhancing life, or are they diminishing it for us?
Yes, and where do they come from, these beliefs that we just somehow blindly accept because
We've
they've been
been
passed down?
trained to accept them. Yeah, we've been trained for so long to accept what we've been told, and it's high time to challenge everything and look at things anew and take what is really helpful, but discard what is not. And
Yes.
I think that we need to move beyond the fear that God will punish us if we dare to question anything that we've been taught.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because the concept of, God is all love, and yet it's like a duality, but yet God is like, will punish and, smite you down or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, but we often don't see that.
Well, they probably don't have time to think about it because they're so busy leading their lives. I've been very lucky to have had time to think and to go into all these beliefs that we've been told, including the belief that we're sinful beings, which is absolute rubbish. Certainly, there's a great deal of evil in the world, but it's not because we're intrinsically sinful. It's that we're intrinsically ignorant of what we really are. And therefore, there's no blame there, but there's just hope that we might become more enlightened with all the other teachings that we've been given.
Yes.
Apparently, what comes through from the other side is that we save and redeem and heal ourselves through the care and service that we give to others and to life. Because we have the innate capacity to do this healing and redeeming and saving, because we carry divinity within us as part of the innate divinity of all life. So I think that's a wonderful thought. It comes through in our religious traditions as well, but not quite so clearly somehow. That love is the absolute necessity for healing all the suffering in the world, and all expressions of love, all the initiatives that are being taken now from different thousands and thousands of people all over the world, including organizations like ours, which I want to mention here because it's so important. It's acting through love. And I think this is just amazing.
Wonderful. It's hopeful that we can help turn the tide by just opening up our hearts.
Exactly. I'll come to that at the end too. But now I'd like to move on to the different bodies we have, because I have this beautiful picture of Dante looking across the river of transition at Beatrice and communicating with his soul, really. It's such a wonderful picture by Blake again, which I happened to find by chance. I want to speak about the subtle body now, because this is something that is very important for us to know about. And St. Paul referred to it as a resurrection body, but there are other writers in ancient times who called it a celestial body, or a radiant body, or a shining or starry body. And even in a beautiful Gnostic poem, that's one of my favorites, as a robe of glory. That's the Hymn of the Pearl, if anybody can find a copy of that, Hymn of the Pearl or Hymn of the Robe of Glory. So just think that we put on a robe of glory, ultimately, if we go through all these dimensions until we reach the ground of spirit. And when we discard our physical body, we inhabit our soul body and have the ability to move into finer and finer forms of it as our soul grows. Because we don't need to stay stuck in the place where we are when we die. We can move on and grow in insight and compassion and understanding. So we have the material body that's familiar to us, which corresponds with that first sphere in my diagram. Then we have the soul body or subtle body, composed of much finer particles than our physical body. And we can move between different levels of this other reality through the power of thought and imagination. We don't need mobiles. We can do it by thought alone, communicating with people. And then there's an even finer spirit body or bodies that we move into as we draw closer to union with the divine ground, with that incandescent light of the divine ground. I just wanted to read you this communication from Beyond the Veil, which says this: "Our world is composed of matter as real and definite as your own. but that matter vibrates at a higher rate. Consequently, your undeveloped senses can have little cognizance of it. And your own sphere being composed of matter at a lower rate of vibration, it's almost equally as difficult for us to manifest on your plane as it is for you to penetrate ours. The principle of cooperation between the two planes is what we desire to establish, for this is more in keeping with the Spirit's deepest longing, more in harmony with that process that is working for the ultimate and absolute destiny of the evolving spirit of man. I think that's so beautifully put and so clear.
Yes, very beautiful. So, what would you say the soul world would be like?
Well, apparently, they're prototypes of the forms of this world, only more beautiful and extraordinary. That the flowers are bigger and more beautiful. The trees are extraordinary. That the grass is as greener as possible. So in these worlds, as in this world, there are mountains and oceans and rivers and lakes. There are rocks, there are trees, there are flowers, there are animals, wonderful birds, exquisite butterflies. I think Eben Alexander has described this in his book. Everything is as real and familiar to the inhabitants of these worlds as the form of this planet are to us. But there we don't need to eat, we don't need to earn our living, we don't need banks, we don't need roads and cars and trains and all the methods of transportation. And we don't need to defend ourselves against attack, at least against physical attack. And we can move freely in our soul bodies. And we can communicate telepathically by thought alone. So they paint a very positive picture, except for what they call the shadowlands, where people can get stuck in beliefs which hold them back, so to speak. And they don't realize they're in this other world, and they have to be lifted out of the darker regions by people going to help them. There's also plenty to do, apparently. There are universities, there are schools, there are places where we can cultivate gardens or create houses for ourselves, where we can imagine and invent and explore and discover and develop ourselves, as well as help those who are lost in these darker and denser regions to move out of them. There are magnificent temples, absolutely marvelous temples apparently, great cities, schools, universities with wonderful libraries, and places for scientists and astronomers to study the universe, for artists and craftsmen to create beauty, for writers to write. I shall go on writing there, I think. For teachers to teach, and for musicians to play instruments. Children who've been separated from their parents by an early death or stillbirth are cared for and are reunited with them when their parents pass over into that world. Beautiful music is one of the features that's most often commented on. And music can apparently create form. That's fascinating. There are hospitals where people can rest and recover as they adjust to their new environment. When you think of all the people, for instance, being killed in Syria at this moment as we speak, they will be cared for. They will be lovingly placed in places where their psychic wounds can be healed, so to speak, and where they can adjust to their new environment. And all the soldiers killed in Afghanistan. And new discoveries can be made by scientists, which can be communicated to scientists on Earth if they will listen. So someone like Einstein certainly did listen, and there are many scientists today who are listening. But perhaps we need to move on now to the experience of the near-death experience and possibly what our own experience will be like as we die. Do you remember what Steve Jobs said when he died? He said, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." And that must have been that he was having a vision of moving into this other world. And it was nothing like what he had expected. Those were his last words. Do you remember them?
Yes, I do. That was quite amazing.
That was amazing. I'd just like to mention here a book by a Dutch cardiologist called Dr. Pim van Lommel. It's called Consciousness Beyond Life, the Science of the Near-Death Experience. And in it he writes, and I'd like to just read this to you. It often takes an NDE to get people to think about the possibility of experiencing consciousness independently of the body, and to realize that consciousness has probably always been and always will be, that everything and everybody are connected, that all our thoughts will exist forever and have an impact on both ourselves and our surroundings, and that death as such does not exist. An NDE provides an opportunity to reconsider our relationship with ourselves and with others and nature, but only if we continue to ask open questions and abandon preconceptions. It's a most interesting book, and I would recommend it to anybody listening to this program. Dr. Pim van Lommel from the Netherlands.
That's interesting that he says that our thoughts will always exist also.
Yeah, apparently this is something that other people have said too from the other side. We have to be very careful what we're saying and thinking about other people, and be aware that almost have a watching brief, so to speak, on what we're letting out into the world in that way.
I know.
So, I brought back this Bosch picture and to describe the stages of the transition. Did you have something you wanted to ask me, Robin?
No, I was just going to comment that I know Dr. Larry Dossey, who we've worked with before, talks about thoughts as prayers, that our thoughts as prayers and how important they are in healing, what we think. Every thought we think is a prayer. And so I become aware of that for here, but not thinking that they would exist beyond here. This is a new idea for me.
Yeah, well, apparently everything that has come into being here exists, it remains, and because it goes into this great net of being, it's recorded like a vast recording system. And in our life review, it's played back to us what we might have said.
Like the Akashic Records.
That's right. So these stages of the transition of going through the veil into another dimension, this is obviously from the near-death experience, but it also comes up in writings from people communicating from the other side. But they're feelings of peace, of bliss, and of intense happiness, and an awareness that we're feeling no more pain. There was a very moving YouTube video of a young boy called Ben somebody who recorded his experience previous to passing over, and he had this experience of intense happiness and bliss, and he died in December, I think. But it's the most beautiful video. I think if you just Google Ben somebody, it would come up. Then there's a sense of weightlessness, as if one was taking off a diving suit, really letting the body go. The body's worn out at that stage probably and is ready to go, but isn't always ready to go if you've been killed, like people have been killed in Syria or Afghanistan. It's a sudden, shocking death. Then there's going through a tunnel like I did when I had my out-of-body experience, sometimes with a roaring, rushing noise, which terrified me at the time, but if I had it again, I would know that there's no need to be frightened of it. And then seeing a bright light which is quite different from sunlight and moving towards it, or being rather attracted magnetically towards it. And someone coming to meet us, sometimes a family member, sometimes a being of light, sometimes in the near-death experience with Anita Morjani, she was told her time was not ready for her to come over permanently. She needed to go back into the world. She had her husband and her parents there waiting for her. So it depends really on the stage of one's life and what is happening in relation to the timing for moving on. Then there's the feeling, many people comment on this, of being embraced and surrounded by overwhelming unconditional love. Something they never really experienced, even the most loving experience on earth can't compare with that unconditional embracing love. Sometimes there's a life review, and there's a restoration of a perfect sense of health, of hearing, eyesight, of lost or crippled limbs that are restored, I often think of Stephen Hawking, who's had such a terrible experience being imprisoned in a body which is, almost paralyzed and unable to move and run around like we do. What will he experience when he dies and finds that he's restored to a perfect state of health and with his limbs restored to what they should have been? Then this beautiful passage again, I'll just read to you. Then, as quietly as dawn meets morning, the separation comes. Out of the housing of the flesh, the inner body emerges and is welcomed by those who have gone before. This is the second birth, so like the first, except that all the knowledge, individuality, and spirituality gained in our earth life is retained, and we live on in the fullness of our mentality and strength as before. So that again, I think, is a beautiful message of hope for us and encouragement.
Yes, it surely is.
Certainly is for me, as I'm now in my 80s and I can't live more than another 20 years at the most. So it's something that I'm thinking about now and holding in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've got a beautiful picture of an angel, I think, which is coming up by Leonardo da Vinci. It's one of my favorite paintings. I have it by my computer all the time. And I think we need to be aware that, as somebody has written, we're surrounded by orders of reality beyond reckoning. There are angelic hosts out there, and there are also demonic hosts. They're both. Different stages of the universe have these different beings in them. And I think we live within an infinite ocean of life, pulsating with energy and intelligence. And somehow the painters of the Renaissance captured this light in their paintings and in their images of these angelic beings, which are so extraordinary. Van Eyck is another painter that carried this wonderful image of angelic beings. And within that field are the souls of people we've loved and have moved beyond this world, but which are still close to us. And we have the power both to create and destroy, both angelic and demonic power. But we also have the power of choice to bring healing to the world or to contribute to its suffering and destruction. And I think this angelic presence here reminds us of this choice. At least it reminds me all the time as I look at it every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this work, the heart should be our guide in all things. We've had so much emphasis on the mind, and I think it's important to actually focus, as a wonderful website called heartmath.org tells us, to actually focus on the heart, even touch the place of the heart every day to reconnect with it, and to trust the guidance of it. All the information that we're getting about the mind and how the mind works is absolutely fascinating and very, very important. But it's the knowledge of the heart that is really our true guide on this planet and needs to become much more conscious, I think. Nothing is more important for our well-being than to know that when we die, we move into another reality that's as real and vitally alive as this one. So consciousness does not die with the death of the body. Consciousness is eternal. So I think that really said all that I wanted to say, except I just want to end with a picture of my book, The Dream of the Cosmos, which has only just come out.
Tell us about your book. I understand it's kind of the culmination of, your full body of work.
Absolutely, it is, because I had to write The Myth of the Goddess with my friend Jules Cashford first, because I had to understand all about the goddess and the goddess cultures. But then I had to widen that out in this book to the concept of the cosmic soul, which we didn't do in The Myth of the Goddess, and that this is the ground of our life, and that it's wanting to communicate with us because we are its children. We are the creation of this extraordinary cosmic life, which has brought the planet into being and all the whole universe into being, and lives through us and in our consciousness, and is wanting to communicate with us, I think. So this book, I think I wrote it almost from the point of view of the cosmos, But its dream is for us to realize that our lives have infinite meaning and infinite value and infinite potential for growth, and that we're surrounded by the light and love of the divine ground that lives in us and through us, in every particle of our being and in all the life that is surrounding us on this planet. So it's a compendium of chapters which first of all begin with my personal experience, the first 3 chapters of that, and then it moves on to a consideration of the culture of the Great Mother, the shamanic cultures, and then what I call the solar era, which is when we lost this vision 4,000 years ago. We began to lose the vision of the shamanic cultures and move into the patriarchal culture, which denied the presence of the feminine really and did its best to get rid of it. And then I have a chapter on the myth of the fall, which I think has been a disastrous myth for our civilization, because it's given us an image of ourselves which is not true, as fallen from a higher world, when in fact we've come here probably with a deliberate plan that we should actually live on this planet. It's not that we've been sinful and been punished. We've been given the privilege of living on this planet and discovering all its treasures and the treasures of the cosmos all around us. So that's an important chapter. And I've also gone into the causes of the oppression of women, why women became identified with nature and men with spirit, and why women were downgraded really in relation to men, just as the goddess was downgraded in relation to the god, or got rid of altogether. And so there's 2 chapters there. And then I go on, and there's a chapter on Jung and the importance of his work and the understanding of the soul that he brought. And then there's a chapter on the shadow and one on war as the rape of the soul, because I think that we were taught by all the great religious teachers, the great spiritual teachers, that killing other people was absolutely against the law of life. But we paid no attention to that law, even though it was given to us in the Bible. And so I've gone into that in some detail. And then I come on to the chapters on the soul and on the image of God that we've inherited from the past, which I think is incomplete. It's got stuck as it existed maybe 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. It needs to move on, it needs to expand and grow into this immensity of what we're looking at when we look at the universe. And so then I have a chapter on alchemy, on the transformation or transmutation of the soul, and one on life beyond death, seeing beyond the veil. And then finally, the last chapter is called Light and Love as the Pulse of the Cosmos. And I have a most beautiful near-death experience there from a man called Mellon Thomas Benedict, which some of you may know, I'm sure. I put that at the end of my book because it made such a deep impression on me and I love it so much. And if you read that, it will give you far more of an idea of what we're moving into and what is all around us than what I've been able to give you. And I'm very grateful to him for allowing me to include it in the book. So that's
Wonderful.
what it's all about.
Oh.
100 pages long, and I couldn't put it into a small book, although I'm always told that less is more. This is a question that I couldn't do it less, I had to do more.
That's wonderful. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
We have a few questions, and the first one is from Virginia. So, Virginia, if I think, Mike, you can enable her microphone. There we go. So, Virginia, your mic's on, and if you see a little video icon next to your name under the panelists, if you click on that, we can see you also.
Okay, I'm trying to find how to get to that screen where oh, there it is. Let me see. Does that work?
Not yet, but why don't you just go ahead and talk and we'll forget the camera. Oh, there you are. Wonderful.
Okay. Hi. This is such a thrilling conversation, and I'm so I'm so grateful to hear your thoughts and ideas, and I'm so curious about the messages that you received about the spirit world, the soul world, from your mother through channeling.
Yes.
My own experience, my grandmother had an NDE, and she was one of those souls who was told it was not yet her time. And this was when she was about 90 years old, and she lived 4 more years, and she experienced a sort of depression as a result of not being able to move ahead to what she had seen, and knowing what she was moving toward. And at the same time, because of our culture at the time, this was in the 1980s, and she had been raised Catholic and was a very Catholic person, and she felt uneasy sharing her experience with anyone but me. She told me about it and made me promise I wouldn't share it with anyone else until she was gone, it's such a dichotomy. And it's remained with me ever since, that there's something so wonderful, and yet in this culture that we live in, we're ashamed or embarrassed or afraid to express not only the curiosity and the exploration, but what we know. And so I'm this long way. I'm taking too much time, but I'm so curious what your mother was able to communicate to you, if you feel comfortable sharing that with us.
Yes, well, I have all her manuscripts and everything that she wrote down, and because I inherited them when she died. So I have all those messages, and I am thinking about putting them out onto the internet, because I think the message that they gave her was so important in 1943, but it's absolutely relevant for now. And I've mentioned it in my book, a little bit of them, but there's more that could be put out. And I've kept it secret. I haven't even really read them to my husband. I've kept them secret for 70 years because, as you say, the culture was not ready to receive them. You were ridiculed or told that you were irrational or superstitious or just plain stupid to believe in these things. But they're so real and so authentic that I've trusted them, and they have been the foundation of my life. And now I feel is the time to speak up about them. So why don't you speak up also about your grandmother's messages and put them out to your friends or put them on the internet or whatever? If you feel there's a message for our time in them, I would do that.
That's a wonderful suggestion. I guess I look to people like you who have so much authority and knowledge in this area. I feel very unqualified to really discuss these things at any length, but perhaps just the fact that they've been entrusted to me and I know this, maybe that's the permission I need to go further.
I think that is. I think you must trust your heart here, like I said, that this is what is important to you, perhaps more important than anything, and you need to trust it and find a way. It doesn't necessarily have to go out to everybody, but just whoever comes to you and seems to be ready, you can talk to them about it.
That's a wonderful idea. I appreciate that, Anne.
Okay, thank you.
I can't wait to read your book. It just sounds incredible.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Mike, did we have another question? Oh, Virginia, before we go, did you have another question?
I had so many as she was talking, but there was one thought that occurred to me, and that was, I remember when the internet was becoming very, very, it was emerging, and people were beginning to use it. It wasn't just for scientists any longer. And I remember hearing, and it was probably through the born-again Christian culture somewhere, that the internet was a tool of the devil, that the code, the universal code for access or something, had the numbers 666, and it was some just awful kind of, almost a myth about the internet. And yet, I was so struck today by what you said, and that the internet is what's allowing us on the planet for the first time to understand how connected we are, and how we're part of one big network of consciousness, that we all have a gift and a part and a right in this. It just hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd never really made that connection before till I heard you speaking today, and I'm grateful that you made that point.
Yes. Well, it has been amazing for me, a discovery, and I think although there's a great deal of evil on the internet as well as good, it is basically a wonderful, wonderful expansion of our consciousness.
I agree.
Great. Thank you. We have a comment from Zena that I'm going to read because she doesn't have her microphone connected. And that is, my sense is the ignorance also lies in the multi-layers of the body, the deepest source within, which flowingly contains our instinctual intelligence, containing our supreme intelligence, that place from which we are mostly disconnected, which is, I knew it at the core of my being, when we say that phrase. As we move more deeply within our deepest source ourselves, the more we are connected to all that is. This talk is beautiful.
Yeah,
So that was from Steve.
I would agree with Zena, with what Zena has said, that I've got a chapter on the body in my book saying that it's been so neglected. But this instinctual intelligence is the source of our supreme intelligence. But because it's been blocked off by looking down on it, it's been kind of atrophied, and it hasn't been able to function as it should and as it does in the shamanic cultures. So we've got to, I think, recover that instinctual intelligence and honor it. It has its negative sides, which I've also explained in the book. But as a guide and tuned into our heart intuition, if you like, it's the most wonderful guide. But it takes time to learn how to tune into it. You need to set aside time in the day to actually connect with it and ask it what it's feeling and what it's wanting.
Yes. We have another question from Jennifer, who also doesn't have a mic. She asks if you believe that we have a death date from the beginning. She asked because many of the NDEs say they had to come back because it was not their time.
Well, that's an interesting question. I really can't answer it because there can be so many unexpected deaths, for instance, in fields of battle, which are just going on in Syria, that would normally not be people's time at all. And the death of accidents that children have. There was a little boy who was riding his bicycle and he lost the control of the brakes, and it went into the main road and he was killed instantly. That sort of thing. Was that his intended time? Who can say? I can't say, but it's an interesting question.
Okay, sir. You've read some wonderful passages about other people's experiences. Can you share any more of your own personal experiences?
I haven't really, except that I felt guided all my life. I felt, as a result of these messages, I felt I had to prepare myself for something. I knew I had to be well educated, so I went to university. And then this amazing opportunity came to travel all over the Far East. I had a job collecting photographs from all the museums in Asia when I was 25. And that was meant to be in my life, I know, because it infinitely expanded my understanding of ancient civilizations, ancient cultures, and also of art. So that was the second huge, important event in my life, if you like. But I felt that there again, I was learning about Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. I was encountering the wonderful art of all those civilizations. And I could bring all that back and put it into a book I wrote called The One Work. And that was when I began to write. And I didn't realize I was a writer at all until I started to write The Myth of the Goddess. And there was many years. I wrote the first one when I was 28, and the Myth of the Goddess when I was 60. So there's a huge gap. And in between, I got married, I had a child, brought the child up, and learned to create a life, really very quiet life, a contemplative life. But I've always felt guided, and I really felt it coming to the fore in this last book, because I knew what I had to bring together now at the age of 81, before I die, that I had to bring all this knowledge I've accumulated together. But if I hadn't had the experience of going to the Far East, if I hadn't had the messages, I would have had no ground and no foundation to build on, or at least not such a rich foundation. So I'm very, very privileged and fortunate in the mother that I had, who had these messages, and also the education I was given by my father, sending me to university, and then this great explorative journey in the Far East, which took me everywhere except China.
That is amazing. What a wonderful job that was.
It was amazing. It changed my whole life.
Yes. And your mother, with her experiences, would she openly share them with others, or just with you, or she kept it close, or?
Well, she tried to share it with others, but can you imagine the 1940s? How difficult it was. And she was married into a conventional background. My father was an army officer and then a stockbroker, and he wasn't interested at all. So he didn't know about these messages. He never read them. So she really shared it with me. I was her confidant in a way for many years. They went on for about 20 years. And she tried to collate them and put them all into books, sort of notebooks. But then she cut them all up and put them under different headings. So she got in a terrible muddle. So luckily I got the originals. But she was and also she studied the Kabbalah. Now, I came to the Kabbalah in my own life, not really knowing that she'd studied, but I found these notebooks and all her study notes that she'd had with the Society of the Golden Dawn in England. So that was very interesting, and she really studied the stars and astrology and all sorts of things very quietly without telling anybody, because there was nobody to tell.
Right.
In those things. Nobody.
Yes.
But in a way, she passed on the thing to me to do it, which she wasn't able to do. She was a poet and an artist, and but she hadn't got much grounding. And she needed somebody who had an education to bring it together and put it in a format that people could assimilate and understand.
Yes.
I'm sure she's listening.
And she's probably been guiding you.
Yeah, I'm sure she has. Yeah.
On the other side. So these messages that she received, were they from like one entity or many, or?
No, there were several entities. I better not go into them who they were, but they were very, very significant entities, really, whose historical personages whom I learnt more about as I went on, so to speak, but also higher beings, what she called higher beings. She had a particular guide, Persian guide called Asraf, who said he was a messenger between the worlds.
This must have had a profound effect on you, opening up that whole new world of spirit.
Yeah, it was very difficult to balance for many years because there was too big a gap between the world of spirit and the life I was trying to live, getting married and a child and all that. So there was a very big, there was a gap which had to be bridged, and it could only be bridged by living. You couldn't do it by thinking or jumping. You had to live it through, decade by decade.
So what do you feel now with, it seems like with Anita Moorjani and, the people you've mentioned, even Alexander and others, and Raymond Moody and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and now it feels that more people are having these experiences, and I'm wondering, it feels to me like as a society, as a humanity, that we are slowly waking up. What do you feel?
I feel that America is far in advance of Europe in this. People like Barbara Marx Hubbard in America and Marion Williamson There are many people who are working, or Deepak Chopra, Larry Dossey. There are at least 20 or 30 very highly evolved people in America who are leading webinars or seminars on waking people up and on this new consciousness being born in us. Particularly, I think, Barbara Marx Hubbard. And I've just done a course of hers on the internet, which was very helpful to me. So I'm immensely grateful to what's coming out of America, and is not nearly so conscious in this country because there is no forum here as much as there is in America, except for the internet right now. And there are people like yourself in Mallorca, and people in France that I know of, people in Germany, very strong movement in Germany. But it's growing, and through the internet, through us communicating with each other and starting things, initiatives, creating maps of what's happening, which is something that I'm doing with some other women, and also activating the intelligence in women, the deep intelligence which has come from all their immemorial experience of raising children and caring for life, and to encourage women to speak out and really take an active part in society.
Yes. What I'm feeling, and maybe I live in a bubble, but here in Mallorca, is it just in general, you know, with I think some of the economy is kind of forcing some issues, but it seems that the more people start to tune into becoming sustainable again, which I think in Europe, it wasn't that long ago that people were growing their own food and, you know, living off the land in a way, or at least in Spain maybe, because it was one of the last places to join the modern world in Western Europe because of Franco. But it seems that, you know, like I'm seeing with the local people here, like, I don't know, an increased awareness, or unless it's just my projection.
I think you're right there, and I think the suffering that's coming now with the collapse of the economy all over Europe and the euro business, there's going to be a great deal more suffering as the young can't find jobs and there's nothing there for if they're going to get going in life with. I think people will begin to question things more and care for the environment more, notice what's needed to be done. For instance, in this country, there's awareness that we have to grow far more food ourselves rather than import it all the time. And the other problem is that our great numbers, our ever-increasing numbers, I think people hopefully are beginning to be aware of limiting their families to not more than 2 children, because we really owe it to the planet to keep things as small a number as possible. Otherwise, we're finished really as a species. So these thoughts are really growing in people. They're being fed by discussion and by the internet and things like population matters in this country. And organic farming, growing more food in an organic way, trying to get rid of pesticides, looking after the bees. That's the most recent thing. The European communities passed this law about the bees not being having those nicotinides or whatever they're called sprayed on the crops. This is all really a progress in environmental consciousness, and something that was started years ago by Rachel Carson is beginning to bear fruit now.
Yes, and you know, I just heard of something in the UK. One of the women that's at this retreat I'm on, and I don't remember where it was, but it's a private school, girls' school, and the Times apparently trivialized it by saying that the headmistress was organizing boasting classes for girls, but really it was self-esteem classes for girls. And in the self-esteem, it's like having these girls learn to discover their own successes, or they think maybe they haven't succeeded at all, and celebrate them, as well as celebrating the successes of others. So eliminating this sense of competition, but really seeing, you know, celebrating everybody's success. And it, which I think is a wonderful idea, that it should be everywhere. And I'm kind of seeing that, I don't know, locally anyway, just kind of sensing a greater expression of kindness in general, which I think is maybe connected to our deeper understanding of our interconnection.
Yeah, I think that is growing, and also there's awareness of the suffering caused by bullying at every level, not only in schools, but in management and government, everywhere really, and this is coming to the fore. Also, the thing that's coming to the fore is child abuse, that people are going back 30, 40 years to bring forward the complaints about being molested by people who are in the limelight or on the BBC or whatever.
Yes.
This is actually making the shadow conscious, and this is all part of consciousness and waking up, is seeing what we've been doing or what has been allowed to be done for many, many years and centuries, really, to do with the treatment of children. So that's part of it too, and that's part of what you say is the greater kindness, compassion for people. And as things get more and more difficult, I think that compassion will have to grow even more and more exponentially. We have to be thinking much more of each other.
Yes. And it gives us hope. And then, like coupling that with really expanding our awareness of the greater cosmos. And, through everything you've been saying today is really helping us take our evolutionary leap.
Forward. And the cosmos wants to help us too. It's there wanting to help us and communicate ways of helping, inspiring us with ideas of what we can do.
Yes.
So there is hope, much hope, great hope, really.
And with your title, The Dream of the Cosmos, I sense it's the cosmos dreaming, what its dream is for us. But do you think we can also, for those who haven't had a NDE or communication with beings on the other side, start to open up to this more through our dreams?
I think so, because as a Jungian, I'm trained to pay attention to my dreams, and I bring quite a few dreams in the book to show people how they affect our life. But I think that if you keep a dream diary, and even when you're having a kind of quiet time, just watch what your imagination is doing and note it down, and begin to communicate with any particular dream that strikes you as important. I think that will help that side of oneself to grow, definitely. Because it's by practicing dream remembrance that the dreams get stronger and more articulate.
And do you think we receive messages from the other side through our dreams?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I'm absolutely sure we do. Some people more than others. It depends. Some people may have it through an intuitive hunch, other people through dreams. Other people may hear a voice speaking suddenly, or with one or two words. Or they may notice things. There was a wonderful book. Oh God, what was it called? When Oracles Speak by Diane Skafter, quite a few years ago now, maybe 10 years ago. But she said you can even notice things if you're in the queue in the supermarket or something and somebody says something in front of you and it's like a message to you. You can just catch something that is passing, apparently not connected with you, but it's like a message and you just can pay attention to those, almost like oracles speaking to you. I like that. It's a lovely book. I would thoroughly recommend it. When Oracles Speak by Diane Skafter.
I like that too. I know sometimes, like I'll hear a song and feel that it's speaking to me. It has a message for me.
That's what I mean, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, this has been so wonderful. It's been so lovely to have this time with you, and thank you for sharing your gifts and your wisdom and your research and your beautiful spirit.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely for me to have an opportunity to communicate. That's lovely for me. So thank you so much for inviting me and communicating with anybody who's listening. Thank you.